My name is Felix, and I am a recovered hopeless dope fiend.
The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom do I fear? The Lord is my life's refuge. Of whom am I afraid? When evildoers come to devour my flesh, these my enemies and foes stumble and fall. When an enemy encamps around me, even then I trust. When war be raged against me, even then I do not fear.
And what are the three pertinent ideas?
A, we were alcoholics and could not manage our own lives. B, probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. And C, God could and would if he was sought.
It's kind of where we left off last time, right?
Specifically, we left off, I believe, at selfishness, self-centeredness.
What these guys mean by selfishness is the combining of self-will and self-centeredness. And this begins 2/3 of the way down on page 60, where it says the first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. And it talks about self-will up until 3/4 of the way down on page 61. Then it starts in on self-centeredness, where it says our actor is self-centered. And that continues for a paragraph. And then it pulls self-centeredness into selfishness, right? Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. And then the next paragraph combines them together into selfishness. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. God makes that possible, and there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without His aid. Many of us have moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we could not live up to them even though we would have liked to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help. The next paragraph begins with, this is the how and the why of it, right? The how is the self-will and the why is the self-centeredness, and that's what these guys are talking about when they refer to selfishness, right? Okay. And I would say that self-will is a combination of willpower and intellectual power, right? And my human resources, as marshaled by the will, together, right, constitutes self-will, and then self-will, self-centeredness constitutes selfishness. Okay. See, when I first started trying to implement this as a manner of living, and they talked about selfishness, I had old ideas, I had prejudices, and I jumped to the conclusion that by selfishness, what that meant was being greedy, right? And my mind immediately dismissed all that by thinking, I'm not that greedy. I mean, if I've earned it and it belongs to me, it's mine. I tend to be. I have every right to be able to harbor that to myself, and I consider myself reasonably generous. Given excess, I didn't have a problem sharing some of it with certain people, all based on my own thinking and my own judgment. Therefore, I am not selfish, right? It took a while of understanding what's going on in this book in order to be able to piece all that together. Frequently what I do is I call it the 4 greater aspects of the moral condition, and they're specifically addressed in Chapter 5, and then that list is presented in both steps 10 and 11, and in different orders, and there's probably a reason why they're in different orders, but I tend to follow the order the way that they come out of Chapter 5, because I can't frickin' memorize everything all the time, right? So the way that they're laid out in Chapter 5 is dishonesty, selfishness, resentment, and fear. And that's where we get the understanding of what these guys are talking about when they're using those words. So, before we move forward on this part, let's cover the dishonesty thing, because in the beginning of this program they talk about, in front of the 3 pertinent ideas, they say our description of the alcoholic, right, which you get out of the first 43 pages of the book as a whole, and specifically on page 21, then the chapter to the agnostic, which is chapter 4, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear these three pertinent ideas, right? So they're talking about addressing the alcoholic condition and describing the alcoholic condition. But when it comes to the program part of it, which begins on chapter 5, it tells very clearly at the end of chapter 2 that the clear-cut directions begin on page 58 with how it works. And that the program is open to everyone. The program deals with the human condition, not the alcoholic condition, right? There's understanding that I have an addict condition and it's a hopeless condition and it's a chronic condition, whatever label you want to put on that. And coming to the understanding that there's absolutely, positively nothing I can do about what I'm reiterating in three pertinent ideas. There's absolutely, positively nothing whatsoever that I can do about that condition, right? I have a condition of mind and body. Circumstances didn't create that condition. I was probably born into it. I reacted that way. However you think that come about doesn't really fucking matter. What matters is that I see clearly that is the condition, and through right everything up to page 57 should have made that clear to me by now, or actually up to page 44. And that no human part could relieve my alcoholism. There's nobody. I've been to therapists. And I started seeing a counselor when I was in third fucking grade, for crying out loud. I was a behavior problem, and I didn't get my homework done, and there was issues enough to justify me seeing a counselor. I continue to see counselors, either secular ones or religious ones, from third grade on up until God got me sober when I was 25, and relapsed at 17 years. And when I come back this time, it was very, very clear to me that nobody has anything to offer me. And sometimes I talk a little bit about how I was raised in the church, and there was people there that I felt like they were loving people, but they didn't really have an answer for me either. I talked to pastors along the way, and they're loving people too, but they didn't have an answer for me. The therapists, the psychologists, psychiatrists, the pastors, the cops, the principal of school, all the people whose predominantly their job is to be helpful to other people, became pretty freaking obvious to me that they couldn't be of help to me. And I've studied a certain amount of psychology and psychiatry in depth. I mean, when I was on the yard, I had a DSM-4 TR. It was like, that was my leisure reading, right? I mean, I've gone into all those theories of the Freud and the Skinner that was tried on me last time I was in treatment, B.F. Skinner, and all this stuff, and because that's the kind of person that I am. It's like, I don't learn easily. I don't. And I have to go through a long series of experiences to become convinced of shit. And I don't even realize that that's what I'm doing. I was just looking for a freaking answer or answers and trying to understand the world that I didn't seem to fit into at all, and gone through all this stuff and become then found recovery. Then God struck me and opened my mind up to really to understand things, and then look back on it all, and it's like, the final analysis is only within me that it can be found, right? I looked everywhere but within myself because it was blocked off, and mostly from fear and hate. That's like it talks about in step 4 that we get down to causes and conditions. And the causes are dishonesty and selfishness, and the conditions are hate and fear. And I use hate rather than resentment. I don't know, I gravitate towards that word for some reason. And but by the time I graduated, well, I didn't graduate, but by the time I got out of high school, I was absolutely, thoroughly convinced that anybody in this world that got to know me well enough, it wouldn't take them very long before they fell into one of two categories, either those that fear me or those that hate me. And I used those exact words for years and years and years, not knowing anything about this program. I was just convinced of that. My life experiences seemed to me to prove that to me, and it's I'm almost 57 years old, and it wasn't until 50 and coming into recovery, not just sobriety, and studying this program and looking at my experiences, I come to understand that all that fear and that hate was mine. And so now I'm living in recovered condition, continuing to be able to see how when I sometimes the Spirit flows through me, and it's not an issue. Man, there's a power greater than me that's flowing through me, but on a day-to-day basis that I try to interact with other people, and invariably my mind generates these fears and these hates. And initially, I think it's coming from them. And so I have to go back to the self-examination and the prayer and meditation and the disciplines of this program to see, okay, to take ownership of that. Okay, what is this bullshit that the fucking mind is convincing me of, again, that is causing this wall of fear or hate that I build between me and the other person, right? Yeah. And not that I can remove it, but that's a lot of what this program teaches me as a guide to get into those kind of disciplines, and then to try to take ownership of it and to see it from that point of view, instead of using my eyes and looking at the situation and the people and judging them and blaming that person treated me. People are going to treat me bad. People are human beings, and everybody suffers from a spiritual malady. And though I don't like their symptoms and the way they affect me, they, like myself, are spiritually ill. And if I'm going to take it personally that I get harmed all the time, and I'm going to put it on them, that it's their fear, their hate that they're taking out on me, I'm going to suffer mightily until I fucking pick up and try to medicate that suffering, right? So I have to take ownership of that, and that gives me the content that I need to be able to offer the simple program, right, which I think is, it's an elusive way of putting it, because really it's offering it to my Creator. That is what I'm doing. It gives me the content that I need to offer to Him, and let Him remove it. And He can and He will if I participate in the process and the discipline of doing that. And it doesn't all go away at once, but a good portion of my life, you know, the majority of the time, more than half of it, I'm not drowning in that fucking fear and that hate and isolating myself from other people and driving me into a state of such loneliness and misery and suffering that I have to pick up. I'm going back down that fucking road again. The topic that I'm circling around is the dishonesty topic, right? This gives you some background as to how I lived 50 years of my life, not being able to be honest about myself, about the fear and the hate that I thought existed in this world was everybody else's all the time. And then all of a sudden, boom, I was capable of being honest, and then doing inventory work and being enabled to start to take ownership of that and understand that that's the stuff that I give to God. The things that I just described, right? Because I'm bringing this back around to the dishonesty subject, because the program itself, that's what it starts in. And I'm going to try to briefly go over that, right? The first paragraph and the next sentence on the first page of how it works on page 58. And so that's the section that a lot of times I'll have people mark in the margin of their book as labeled as dishonesty, because I just explained to where the selfishness is forthcoming in a couple more pages, right? And this is the dishonesty section. So it says, rarely have we seen a person fail to thoroughly follow our path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program, usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those, too, who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. Okay, so briefly, the next sentence is: if you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. And my take on this is the second decision in the process. Last time we got together, we discussed the first decision. Okay, do you find yourself in the category of where their chances are less than average, and do you want to move into the category of rarely have we seen a person fail? That's the first decision in the process of decisions that take place in the third step experience. So I would say, based on my current understanding, this would be the second decision that you make. But going back to the dishonesty part, this is laid out in such a way as to be cause, condition, result, solution. And this is a common thing that goes on throughout the book, right? Because I didn't get to it last time to put the period at the end of the sentence when it comes to the second step part. It says could restore us to sanity, and people that are reasonably well versed in this program come to understand that insanity is not doing the same things repeatedly and expecting different results. That's a false teaching that's fucking killing people. That the insanity is the state of mind I get into for hours and days preceding picking the first one up. That I know what the consequences are, and I know this is all going to be bad, but none of that stuff ever enters my mind, and the ability to not pick it up disappears, right? It's this insane state of mind that leads me to the first one. But nobody that I've listened to hundreds of speakers and gone to thousands of fucking meetings in 39 years, and I've never heard anybody explain what sanity is. And this book, where they present sanity is, later in the book, it talks about Henry Ford once made the remark something to the effect that life experiences of extreme of supreme value, but that is only true if one is willing to put the past to good account. So what do they mean by that? And what do I have to do, right? So step one and step two is a fact-finding process. Okay, so if you haven't had the experiences yet, well, you're probably going to go do some more research, but a lot of us, by the time we show up here, we've had enough experiences that all we have to do is take the right perspective and find those experiences and get the facts out of them that we need to be convinced of the first two steps, right? That's why after the 3 permanent ideas, if you are convinced, right? Convinced on what? Convinced of the facts that I have gotten from my past experiences. So they're a fact-finding process. Then step 3 is a decision-making process. And then from there out is an action-based process, okay? So sane manner of living is looking at my past experiences and getting the facts that I need. And this book is a guidebook, so it helps me find the right facts that I need to come to certain conclusions. And based on those conclusions, I make certain decisions. And based on those decisions, I take action. That's the sane fucking manner of living. And it's repeated throughout this book in small sections, in a broad way it is. That's how they present material. It's logical and it's ordered because I'm a stickler for facts and results. And I love logic. But unfortunately, I'm never satisfied with the proposal that doesn't lend itself to a reasonable approach and interpretation. So it's a never-ending quest. So the dishonesty thing, that's how this is laid out. Cause, condition, result, solution. The cause is that I was born constitutionally incapable of being honest with myself. Right, so I started out sharing experiences of how I've come to see the facts of how I was constitutionally incapable of being honest with myself. Not in regards to my using, but in regards to fear and hate. Right, what I was like, what happened, what I am like now is generally how I try to take a topic or to look at it broad perspective or look at it like right here, right now, today, yesterday. What was I like? Well, what happened? I went to bed and I woke up and today was different. And what am I like today? It can be taken in any as broad a context as you want or as narrow of a context as you want, which I'm jumping ahead of myself. So finding my experience in this book, that's what I've done, right? So I could not... people who do not recover, people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to the simple program, right? I couldn't completely give myself to the simple program and get the content that I need to share with another guy or the content that I need to give to God because I could not or will not do that because I didn't know who and what I was, right? I didn't have enough truth. It might have been laying there in my experiences, but I didn't have enough of it. So in a first step experience, generally speaking, I will learn about what I am, that I am a chronic alcoholic or I'm a hopeless dope fiend or whatever label you want to put on that. And in a 4-step experience, I start to learn who I am in light of being dishonest and selfish and full of hate and full of fear and been inconsiderate towards others and a lot of things start getting a grasp on that. And then step 5 is the first opportunity to share that with another person to start to begin. Right, to begin. And then grow from there, always in light of what I was like, what happened, what I'm like now. Not what it was like. And, that gets on me. I mean, I hear people that have been circus speakers for decades, and they're still going out there talking about what it was like. The other day I listened to somebody at a speaker meeting online in CA, and whether they say it or not, that's what they're doing. It was 45 minutes of drunk-a-log and 5 minutes of recovery. And it's like, and then wonder, why nobody wants to listen to all that. And because that's what they've been told, and that's as far as they've gotten is what it was like. That doesn't work. What it was like is circumstances, right? And if they're talking about 45 minutes worth of drinking, I can't even relate to that. And I don't know how to drink anyway. That's completely fucking useless. It's a waste of my time. It's a waste of everybody else's time. If we start talking about loss of control, if we start talking about the progression of it, how I use more and more and more, if I start talking about how many times I tried to quit, and I get down to the details of that, it's like, I tried to quit, I went to treatment, I got a treatment, I had every intention of quitting, I got, within a week or 2 weeks or a month that I picked up again, and I started talking about the state of mind that preceded that. I mean, the things that this program has taught me to do. I started talking about what I was like, right? And then what happened? Well, I got a treatment. And then what happened? Then I had every intention of drinking. And then what happened? Well, my motive was that I needed to get a job and I needed to get a car and I needed to take responsibility for myself. And then what happened? And then what happened is 90 days later, then I thought, well, a six-pack wouldn't hurt anything, right? How I felt, what I thought, what my motives were, and what happened. And then what happened? Well, I went off the fucking rails. Earlier days it took a couple of years, and the last time out it took a couple of months, and the next time after that it took a couple of weeks. So now I'm starting to take the progressive nature that this book has taught me to do, and I'm getting the facts I need to be able to tell my story about what I was like. So I learned what I'm like. I have to learn what I am and who I am to be able to constitute my story in life. Okay, so that's truth. I mine it for facts of truth, right, is what I'm doing. So that is why I couldn't completely give myself to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves, there are such unfortunates that are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. So born into this condition. All human beings are born into this condition, disconnected from the source of power and direction that we need to successfully manage life, right? To succeed in life. We're disconnected from that. They're naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. So, based on that cause that I was born into, this is the condition that I've lived in until such time as the power given through the grace of God has given me the ability to open my mind up, and I find willingness, open-mindedness, and honesty. These are divine powers to be able to start gaining ground in this. Their chances are less than average, right? In this category, we talked about that. There are those who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity or the potential to be honest. And we mean grave emotional and mental disorders. And past experience has proven to me that if I carry my fears far enough out, I'll become suicidal. And if I carry my hate far enough out, I'll become homicidal. I tried killing somebody. There was other attempts prior to that, but that was the one I got caught for. And I've been in prison for 11 years. The grave. And maybe not always grave to me, but grave to somebody. Right, and this is a short list of clinically defined disorders that I find myself or have at some point or another found myself in, could be diagnosed for, including OCD, anxiety, impulse control disorder, depression, mood disorders, being bipolar, seasonal affective disorder, being psychotic, having panic attacks, phobias, ADHD, PTSD, antisocial personality disorder. At any given point in time in my past life, I could have gone into a qualified shrink's office and they would have diagnosed me with one or more of these fucking disorders. And pills are not the answer to those disorders. And drugs are a temporary solution to these. They continue to get worse and worse and worse until such time as I start getting truth. Right? I need more truth about myself, and once I get more truth about myself and I use that to engage in the rest of this process, to make decisions and take action, then I form a relationship with the power, and that power works through me. It doesn't fix my fucking mind. If I have chemical imbalances in my mind and they need to be fixed, God will fix them. Otherwise, they'll be what they're going to be. And my life doesn't run on what my mind tells me to do a lot of the time, or when it does take over, it's shorter and shorter lived. I turn back, because step 3 is we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to care of God. So on an ongoing basis, I continue to have to, my mind got a hold of me. It's running me out into some crazy shit, with hate, fear, some crazy disorder, OCD, right? People talk about that. I can't shut my mind off. My mind keeps running. Well, my mind is a tool that it's a gift. And it is a transceiver, is to receive power and direction and to take whatever experiences and intellectual knowledge that it has to be used as to help the next person, right? It was never designed to be something by which for me to run my life with. Is how I would put that.
No, absolutely. And for too long, my personal experience, for too long I've let my mind run the show, and that's the big problem.
I always thought the answer to that was shutting the mind off, and it's not. It's about forming a relationship with the power that'll work through me and run my life for me. And then, as it's doing that, it'll use my mind as a tool the way that it wants to. Like my mentor says, either me and God work together to use my mind as a tool, or my mind takes over and uses me as a tool of destruction. Those are the only two options that are on the table, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting, the list of clinical diagnoses, because I could definitely relate to 90% of them, but I mean, you would have had to have a pretty clever doctor to get the admissions out of me to ever diagnose me properly. And also, by the time I found opiates, it seemed asinine too, because I remember, I don't know if it was my mother or my father, somebody had made the suggestion, like, well, why don't you, maybe you need to see a therapist, and da-da-da, maybe you need to be on meds. And I was like, for what? I already found a med that does the job. It's called heroin. We're trying to get me off. We're trying to get me off of that.
Yeah.
Why would I go and get other meds? A, I already found the one that works. B, it's not working very well. It's creating a whole other heap of problems. So it is, but it's interesting just hearing you read the list, because I was like, check, 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 meh, check, check.
I know I can find a lot more of them. There's no point in me continuing to go on. For other people's benefit, that I have gotten a few of the main ones put together that other people can relate to, and listed them in my book to use to be able to help the next guy. I mean,
right. That makes perfect sense.
A lot of the purpose of why I'm here and have the experiences that I've had, is to help the next person. The first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. On that basis, we are almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. So, you go into a situation and you're thoroughly convinced that your motives are good and that all should go well, and right, and you find yourself in collision with something or somebody.
99% of the time.
Can you give me an example?
I've done a lot of that dishonesty thing is really hitting home for me, because I've really, it's come to light to me how good I am at deceiving myself, how good my mind has been. But in relationships, right? Maybe I like somebody and I'm like, hey, you want to go to a meeting? Right? Because they need a meeting, I need a meeting. But deep down, what I want is to just spend time with that person. It's a completely selfish motive. But I mask it to myself as, well, we need to go to a meeting, it'd be good for, I haven't been to a meeting in a while, or whatever the reason may be. Be a perfect example. Do that. I would do that all the time, because I'm constantly seeking that validation.
So you want to get them to a meeting so you can spend time with them for what purpose?
Get out of myself. Too much time in my head by myself.
It's a distraction.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Also, I do find that, just plain and simple, like right now, just any time that I'm spending time with somebody, because I'm the type of person that gives my attention to who I'm with. I try not to sit on my phone or be distracted by other things.
Mm-hmm. Were you always like that?
Yeah, I have been.
I remember months ago sitting at your mother's house.
Well,
and you were sitting on your phone while we were alone in the room.
Okay, an active addiction, no.
Okay,
that's
get
fair.
Some clarification going
that's
on
fair.
there. Get some honesty generated.
Right. So an active addiction, absolutely no. Because if I had to sit down especially with someone from the program, then they are an active reminder of me not, of the chaos that I have going on in my life, of everything.
You're doing everything in your power to try to block consciousness of.
Right. Yeah. So it's a hard thing to do, right? To sit down specifically with someone who is either in recovery or doing well for themselves, whether it's family or friends. They were an active reminder that I'm not. I'm doing the opposite. Please don't bring that up. You know?
Mm-hmm. If you're going to sit here and talk about all that, I got better things to do. You're out of here or I'm leaving.
Right.
Or I'm going to sneak off to the bathroom and I'll come back in a completely different condition to be able to put up with your ranting and your preaching and your fucking lecturing.
I'm not going to try to find out what we were reading last week, or the other day. Let him preach. My whiskey will last longer than his ranting.
Yeah. So, you present somebody with an honest motive of going to a meeting, you even are convinced of that yourself, and it looks like, for the most part, a selfless thing to do, but underlying that is selfish motives.
Yeah.
So, we're talking about facts and results. If these are facts, the results we're looking for is ending up in collision with something or somebody. You ended up in collision when you ended up in jail. You end up in collision with the cops and you end up in jail, right? You're in collision with the justice system.
Absolutely.
Okay? As a result of what motives did you start off with? How far back can you trace that to selfish motives?
To the specific events that...
I used to have the attitude that I don't have a drug problem. The main problem really is that they don't legalize drugs and they should. So I ranted and raved about all that for many years, that they need to legalize drugs. I would go on just rants about how pathetic it is that drugs aren't legal. And I grew up in Wisconsin as a teenager, and still to this day, marijuana is not legal in that state. We have conservative people there that are like, no. Right. And so, when I left Wisconsin with no driver's license and no insurance and $2 in my pocket and no plans for the future, and all I had was a rusted out, falling apart old Buick, and I just abandoned everything and drove off in the middle of the night, my first intention was, I'm going to go to Oregon because that's where weed is most readily available, and if it ain't legal yet, it's going to be legal soon. It's decriminalized at least, right? I had no idea that God's plan for me was to end up in Arizona. And 8 days later, I ended up in Arizona. But that was the only tangible idea that I had somewhere in my head, and that is why I had that idea. That's what it was based on. Mm-hmm. And by the time I got to the state border, I didn't follow that idea. But this was part of the motives that gave me the stupidity or the courage or the desperation to pack the shit up in my car, drive off in the middle of the fucking night, and 31 years later, whatever it is right now, 33 years later, here I am still sitting in Arizona. That's part of the motives, and this is part of the result of that. What I was like, what happened, and what I'm like now. Okay? And so, being in collision with the justice system, you started out with motives that seemed good, right? I just like getting high.
Well,
seemed good enough at the time, but...
I mean, if I trace it back far enough, this last relapse...
Okay, so we're almost always in collision with something or somebody.
But...
I'm trying to find that experience.
I mean, the collision would be with her.
Ooh, okay.
I think she wants to call somebody to come grab her, to bring her over, to get the vehicle. Even now, I find myself in collision. I'm trying to... all this wreckage that I've made, right? And get my life back on track. Well, it requires a lot of my time. And what it's ended up requiring is that my dog needs to be watched. And she endlessly watches the dog for me. And I know that on some level it helps her out having the dog there. She stays at home a lot. She needs that company, but at the same time, what if she wants to just go do something? What if she wants to live her life? It's something that I certainly don't take into consideration very much. It's there, but it's always an afterthought. Well, I hope she's okay watching the dog. My mind justifies it right now as, well, if I had stayed in rehab, then she would have been stuck with the dog anyway until another 10 days, or 12 days, whatever. So at least I'm getting ahead on trying to get stuff back on track.
So, one of the things that I've gotten out of this is the selfishness section ends with, this is the how and the why, but the how is self-will and the why is self-centeredness, and there's sometimes links between these two. So this specific sentence, on that basis we're almost always in collision with somebody or with something or somebody, even though our motives are good, has a link, can be linked to experientially on the next page where it says, okay, what is his basic trouble? And the second question, the third question that it asks in that series of questions is it not evident to all the rest of the players that these are the things he wants, right? And this crops up in my life even now today, all the time. Because I don't communicate with other people. I have an idea in my head of how things should go, and I feel offended when they ask me, or when after the fact they say, well, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Because I'm offended by the fact that somebody thinks that I should take my time and my energy to even explain to it. You should just trust me and know that I have your best interests at heart as well as my own. And that I'm doing the best possible course of action that can be taken. And you should just go along with it. when you need long-winded explanations, you want to take up time with all that, and I have to explain all that to you, and then it isn't even suitable to you. I got to get the big box of crayons and the big fucking tablet out and draw you a fucking picture. That's the attitude I start to adopt. I become angry, indignant, and self-pitying, right? Because you should just know what's the matter with you, right? So I end up in collision with something or somebody, right? And it's always because of these self-will and self-centeredness that I'm operating in, right? And romantic relationships tend to be a focal point for finding all this kind of stuff, because that's where we get the closest to somebody, and that is where a lot of these character defects become most evident, so they become the easiest to be able to start to look at how these things are manifesting in my life, right?
Right.
And in the last few months, I've gone through that. I've gotten involved in somebody else's life, and I start doing this, that, or the other thing, and collision has occurred repeatedly. I'm using my head to run things, right? And instead of seeking the spirit within. And a lot of times, I have to look inward. I have to realize that this is me trying to run the show, and that I do my inventory work, and not be walking into the situation with what I think. Okay, my thinking and the indwelling spirit are two different things. And a lot of times how I think, and it seems so freaking obvious, that this is what needs to be done, this is how it needs to be done, how could it possibly be any different than that, right? I am thoroughly convinced. To abandon that, to abandon that, and to try to look within and try to feel what the Spirit is indicating that I should do. Right? Should I pause when agitated or doubtful? All right, and sometimes that pause can last moments, sometimes hours, sometimes days, sometimes weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years. I don't know how long that pause is going to go on for. Maybe that's what needs to be applied. Maybe I need to end this whole situation. Maybe, and I don't know. I seek internally an answer of, should I continue to try to work at this, or do I just need to go in some other direction, right? And And if I don't know, then I try to take a step forward. I try to move in one direction or the other. And if one direction seems like, it feels like I'm going to be colliding with somebody or something, then maybe I'll try a different direction. And that's how I ended up in Tucson instead of going back to Phoenix. I kept trying to make plans to go to Phoenix, and they seemed like they kept falling through. Instead of letting my mind rationalize and justify of why each one fell through, and I need to go back there and let that thinking take over, let go of that. Okay, I'm just going to put some effort into investigating what it would take to go to Tucson instead, because I felt God made it clear that I couldn't go back to living in the country, that going back into the city, was something that I needed to do. And I've become a fan of the Sonoran Desert, so it had to be in the Sonoran Desert. And if you look at the major cities that are in the Sonoran Desert, and I couldn't leave the state of Arizona because I'm on parole, that set the parameters right there. So Phoenix or Tucson would be the next best option, right? This was my decision-making process. So I put some effort into seeing if I couldn't get a place to parole to in Tucson, and all of a sudden, in a matter of probably 3 days, it just unfolded to come here to this Oxford house. And that's how God's will presented itself to me in my life. And given a month or 6 months prior to that, I never imagined that would ever be happening.
Right.
And then once it unfolded that way, and I come to realize that was God's will in my life, then what appeared after that in my mind was, there was some bits and pieces of thoughts of possibly going to Tucson months or a year and a half prior to that I wasn't even that aware or conscious of, was floating around in the back of my head on the edge of the fringes of my consciousness. And I didn't even realize that was happening. And I didn't realize that until after the rest of it unfolded. And this is typical of experiences that I've had in following this spiritual path that they speak of in my life. And learning, I hear a lot of people talk about to follow that small, still inner voice, or however you want to word that, right? And the pioneers of this program used a verse out of the Old Testament about something to the effect of, Lord, speak, or and thy servant heareth, or something like that, right? That is part of how I find my experience in this material right here. So that's what I'm trying to help you do, is to try to help, if you have found yourself, most of my life, up until I found recovery, which has only been in recent years, most of my life I always felt like I was always not just a square peg trying to fit in a round hole, but I was always in collision with something or somebody all the time. That I was always trying to run uphill. Like Bob Seger says, running against the wind. Like I'm always running against the wind. I'm always going against the grain of every fucking buddy else. I would always argue with people, or I just fuck you and walk away, become indignant, and I'm not even discussing with you. It ain't worth wasting my time for. Just this constant collision with things and people all the time. And in recovery, I find that, that's part of how God has made me, is to be challenging. I've been gifted with intellect, and part of my character is to challenge things around me. But he has stripped away a lot of the negative aspect of that. Instead of arguing with other people, to give me the patience to pause and to listen to where they're coming from, give my life examples on how, to the character trait, the personality trait is still there, but the motives have been changed and the results are completely different, and that's not my fucking doing. But I've come to know that as part of myself, is that I'm challenging. When somebody is saying something, like even my mentor, there's things I disagree about him, and a lot of times I have him on a pedestal because he's the spiritually endowed person that I know of, that I've ever gained personal access to, and that is still alive. But still, everything that he talks about, I either challenge and I find my experience of what he's talking about, and I learn something out of it and I grow, or it's like, you know what, there's been a few pieces along the way where, no, I disagree with that, and this is why. And my experience in this book and scripture, and I have these working examples that have convinced me that, no, I don't agree with that.
Right.
I have a challenging nature, and for years you've heard me at meetings a lot of the time. You've seen that firsthand in the past, how I would start out sharing with, well, I don't mean to sound contradictory, but, but I can do that judiciously today in my life. I don't have to talk over the top of somebody and argue and lecture with them, try to convince them of how I think it is. God enables me to be able to pick my battles wisely, and I don't find myself so much in constant collision with something or somebody. Part of the 10-step promise to start out with, we're not fighting anything or anyone anymore, not even liquor, right?
It's interesting because I remember I used to disagree with a lot of what you used to say. Definitely you're very persistent, and I like how you have put that. Me trying to find my experience through what you're saying, It's interesting because I sit here and I find myself much more open-minded to what you're saying, what's in this book, specifically because your endless repetition of how important it is to sharing what I have, right? Sharing my experience, helping the next man. Because it's just something that you used to say all the time, and I was like, yeah. I'll do what I can.
You didn't have the willingness. Lack of power was your dilemma. Sound accurate?
Yeah. But where and how to find that power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about.
You're finding more willingness now.
Yeah, absolutely.
How did that happen?
It was a slow process through my using. This last time was just so different. I was using for about a year and a half, and in that year and a half, there wasn't one single day of using of joy. The closest to it, because I put that on the foil, and I thought, okay, if I hit this, it's going to destroy my life, right? I'm counting on that destruction, because I needed to blot out the uncomfortable feeling that I felt so many times in the past, and all indications at that point had proven to me that I was going to keep running into it. I always did, no matter what. I just put in almost 2.5 years of recovery, and still I keep running into the same feeling.
To be clear, a couple of years of sobriety.
I mean, there was recovery.
Of your spiritual vision?
There was growth there.
How far out could you see? When I'm talking about growth, I'm talking about spiritual vision. Being able to see farther out. Because what we suffer from when in an insane state of mind is what they call an appalling lack of perspective. Maybe not the wrong perspective, but a lack of it. We're short-sighted. I can't see beyond the end of my nose, and the only thing I feel is I need to get high now. That's an insane state of mind.
It definitely, whatever that vision was, definitely fell off while I was still working at the Ark. So it fell off probably 4 months before I picked up. I remember specifically the first indication that something was definitely wrong was I was looking through a client's property, and I was finding foil, and I'm tossing all the stuff onto the side. And then I found one foil, because all of them that I found thus far were open foils that were burnt and whatever. And I found one foil that was folded up, and I threw it onto the pile, and then this back of my head was like, I wonder if that's heroin or fentanyl pills in there. Can anyone find heroin? I wonder. And I opened it up to look at it. No intention of using it, right? But I knew that, why does that matter to me? And I knew that that was a problem, that there was something wrong there.
identifying your vision getting shorter and shorter until you have none. You have suffering from an appalling lack of perspective.
You know,
See, I can't see very far out in my material circumstances. I don't know next week. Well, I do next week, but beyond the next 3 weeks, I can't see where I'm going to be living at. I don't know that, and I don't worry about that. But when it comes to spiritual vision, I know that I've been commissioned to do certain things in the spiritual realm, and I've had to curb or end a romantic relationship. I've had to be redirected in letting certain things go, and my life is being managed in light of their specific things. Some of them are more specific than others, of things that he would have me accomplish. And I've heard stories from other people about they are thoroughly convinced that God wants them to write a book, and they have an idea for the book, and they have some content in their mind about the book. And you see them a month later, have you started on the book? No. And next thing you know, they're working for a roofing company. And they've completely forgotten about what they were commissioned to do. And I've heard that story more often than not. The ones that Scripture talks about faith and obedience, our language is praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. Our specific purposes have been revealed to people, and very few people actually follow them, because you have to make decisions in your life along the way that keeps you on track of fulfilling that purpose. Okay.
Yeah.
Purpose, commission.
Yeah.
I've started recently calling it a commission.
I would guess a noun is a thing, whereas commission is a verb. It is an action. So that makes sense. Bringing that up, going back to the spiritual vision, then I would say the only thing that I saw any purpose, any commission in before was, working in the behavioral field was something that was kind of, it seemed to me that that's where I needed to go, and that felt like the right place, and it still does. Beyond that, I didn't know what I was going to do. In my mind, I was like, I felt very lost still before. It was very much, I was following directives, is what it felt like, as best I could, on the yard with you. Once we were sent to 2 different yards, I leaned very heavily on getting together with Danny and trying to continue. It's funny because I never thought of it. I really didn't. I guess maybe somewhere in the back of my head I was thinking spiritual, but that's not what I was thinking. I wasn't trying to grow spiritually. I was trying to further my knowledge of what recovery was for me, what it meant. What could I do?
Trying to use your head.
Yeah.
Right. I think we've covered this before, how the main problem centers in the mind.
Right.
Right? And deep down within every man, woman, and child is a fundamental idea of God, not my idea of God, God's idea for me. Right? It may be obscured by calamity, pomp, and worship of people, sentiment, things, money, and self, but in some form or another it is there. It is only there that He may be found. For faith in a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but He was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within. In the last analysis, it is only there that He may be found. It was so with us. So the problem centers in the mind, and the spirit dwells in the body, is what they're describing, right? The path that they speak of is going from using my mental faculties to relying on the guidance of the spirit within. That's the path. That's the journey. And we start out, and I did the same thing. I started out with, the last time I was in treatment was in 1994. I spent 17 months in inpatient treatment in a therapeutic community, and I started in on trying to learn this thing and the steps and other various things. And identifying emotions was something that was a subject matter that came up. Well, so I go on an intellectual investigation, right? It's like, well, I can't really identify or put words to emotions for myself, so I collected this list, and I found other people had other lists, and these lists had, some of them were similar, some of them were not. Next thing you know, I gathered every list I could find and add some more of my own, and I had this multi-page list of 600 different words to try to help me learn how to identify what emotion that I'm experiencing, you know? And I look back on that stuff, and it's like I was using every ounce of intellectual power that I had to try to solve my fucking problems. And the slow journey has been to get disciplined in listening to the indwelling spirit for guidance, and how freaking different that these are. You know, they start talking about meditation, and I would get a meditation tape, and I would go sit on the lawn in the back of the treatment facility and sit there trying to meditate, because I was using my head to try to learn how to meditate. You know, and now I'm meditating while you're talking and I'm listening and I'm drinking my coffee. I'm meditating. I've come to understand that meditating is step 11 is sought through prayer meditation, right? And the simplest form of prayer is asking, right, or seeking, or sought, or however you want to put that. And a simple form of meditation is like people that go to meetings. That's a form of prayer, just suiting up and showing up, because you're seeking, you're looking, you're praying, you're asking. And sitting there at a meeting in the present moment and having an open mind and an open heart is the simplest form of meditation. Just being open. I'm not speaking. There's not some power working through me or my mind making some shit up. I'm sitting here with an open mind and an open heart, ready to receive. Right? Ask and ye shall receive. But it is better to give than it is to receive. And what I receive, my cup will floweth over. So I have something to offer the next guy. Right? Scripture. Throw a little scripture in there.
I'm glad you said that.
So, if my mind is not going wah 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 wah, then I have an opportunity to be right here, right now, looking within, and having an open mind and an open heart is the simplest, most effective form of meditation. That's meditating. I'm meditating on and off throughout my day.
That's really interesting as you put it that way. Like I was saying earlier, I did not leave my house with the plans of coming here. I left the house with plans to get to a class that I was supposed to, but I saw I'm going to show up 10 minutes late for an hour class. They're not going to let me in. What do? You know what? I should go see if Felix is available. But there's lots of times where I have nothing going on, but 1,000 voices going on in my head, a bunch of different worries, and should I do this, should I do that, what should I do, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, let's go to a meeting. And without even realizing it, that is when my mind is the quietest. Because I'm sitting in that meeting, just listening to what other people have to say. So of course I seek that out. Especially when my mind's just going, the gears are running, and I don't know what to do with it all. And I'm like, let's go to a meeting. Well, yeah, because I've conditioned myself to sit in that meeting and let that all go for the hour and just listen.
So now you like going to meetings?
Oh yeah, I love going to meetings.
Did you in the beginning?
In the beginning, what?
The beginning of when you got introduced to going to meetings.
No. At first I went because my family wanted me to. Then I kept going because probation wanted me to. When I wasn't doing what probation wanted, like urine analyses, I still kept going for a while. And I would sit in those meetings and I would never share. I would just sit there and listen. And
Why would you go?
Because there was this camaraderie and this joy and this happiness in there. And I wanted what they had. I also was like, these people are full of shit. Like, I look back at it and laugh because I'd sit in there and I'm like, I wish I had that. I wish I could be carefree like that. I wish I could be a part of what this group has. And then I would proceed to not do any part of what the group was doing. I wanted to be a part of the group, but wouldn't do what the group was doing. I still to this day
feel sorry for myself.
Oh yeah, and then I would smoke 2 cigarettes after the meeting, and wait for someone to come ask me, not just any question. It had to be the right question, and they never did. How are you? I'm good.
I spent a lot of years of my life, right? How I'm good. How was the meeting? Great. Now I'm out of conversation.
So I'll never. This will always stick with me. It was Midget's first share in a meeting. He came in and said angrily, and my sponsor said I have to share. So I guess I'm going to share. I don't know what the fuck I'm going to share about. I don't know. I guess I've been to a lot of meetings, and I guess I never tried or applied myself because I was afraid that it might work. It was one of the most moving things I had ever heard anybody share. I was like, oh, shit. Yeah, I think I did that too. And it also was a reminder, right? Because you were working with him, working with me at the same time, trying to do the same thing, to get me to share my experience to help the next man, right? And he went in there with one of the most angry shares I've ever heard that was very enlightening to me. And he didn't know that. He didn't know that what he was sharing would stick with me. It's only been 4 years, but that stuck with me. This process has been an unfolding process, for sure.
I felt a lot of years of my life that I was looking for that person that would start asking me the right questions. That person never showed up. The person I refer to as my mentor now, I thought at one point in time, in the beginning, that he was the person. I knew that he knew some shit that would be very helpful, and I come to understand that I'm the kind of person who learns better by observation. The responsibility isn't on that person, but I know that I did. I was still, for many years, thought that there was somebody who knew some truth that would be able to ask me the right questions and be able to get that out of me, that I could trust well enough to tell them really what was going on, what I thought was way, way deep inside of me. And the weirdest thing happened, right? Because it talks about both you and the new man must walk day by day in the path of spiritual progress. If you persist, remarkable things will happen. When we look back, we realize that the things which came to us when we put ourselves in God's hands were better than anything we could have planned. Follow the dictates of a higher power, and you will presently live in a new and wonderful world, no matter what your present circumstances. Right, page 100. And it talks about both you and the new man. So this last time that God got me clean and sober, and I started breathing this program, one of the first thing that happened was this young black fellow that I was going to meetings with, and I wouldn't really call them meetings at that point in time in that place, came up to me and asked me if I sponsored people, and that was a spiritual experience in and of itself, and I'm not going to elaborate on that at this particular time. But then I felt like, okay, I needed to take him through the book, and I needed to explain to him how this book was, right? That was the beginning point, right? So I started working with other people, and it drove me through learning the beginning stages of learning this program. And then as I was doing step work with other people, I needed to find my own experiences to exemplify what it is that they needed to see for themselves in their own experiences. And so, like this other person, this new man, this identity that was somewhere out here, started to develop and solidify and become clearer, right? And the more I worked with other people, the more solid that identity became. And then a year or two down the road, all of a sudden, that new man seemed, one day, all of a sudden, it seemed like that person merged with me, like I became one with that person. Okay, the person that formed was trying to be the person that I thought I needed to be for the other guy sitting across from the table. And when that happened, I come to realize that what I was looking for all along, and didn't realize it was my own damn self. It was my own sense of divine identity. That's what I come to realize, right? So, and then once I found that within myself, now it's a disciplined process of becoming more aware and more conscious of walking in that, continuing to grow into that person that has always been within me, that I've always sensed that there was a person in me that was that wanted to come out. As part of what I sought, when especially drinking, but getting high, but drinking specifically, drinking seemed to loosen my inhibitions to the point where there was this person, this thing in me. The control that my mind had over me. I was living in a mental and emotional prison. That alcohol, getting drunk enough, would release the grip of that, and there was another person that come out. There was a sense of freedom that came out of that experience, and that was still mostly a false sense of self. It was a superficial and artificial sense of freedom from lack of control, lack of being under control of my own fucking best thinking, right? But there was another person within me, and there still is. Sometimes I feel like there's this person that just doesn't have the ability, the lack of fear, the confidence, the outgoingness to say, do what it is I feel that I should be, you know. And I sum that all up in the word reticence. That's on my character defect list. There's sometimes like I feel like I should say something, but I'm in a group of people and I'm a prison of my own fear, and I don't say anything. I just go. I walk away from it all, right? Things go unsaid because there's a person inside of me that's always wanted to get out, and this is a slow, lifelong process of that person becoming more and more that person and less the old person, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.